Level 1, the Crisis Negotiator. You're 29 years old, a former Army interrogator, now in your first month as an FBI crisis negotiator. The training was 8 weeks of intensive simulation, role-playing, and psychological theory. You learned about de-escalation, active listening, building rapport, identifying triggers. You learned the statistics. 95% of crisis negotiations end peacefully. You learned that your voice is your most powerful weapon. And then they put you in the actual world, and you discover that statistics mean nothing when a man has a gun to his head and you're the only voice he's listening to. The call comes in at 2:47 a.m. Armed male, barricaded in an apartment in Northeast DC, making statements about wanting to die. The tactical team is in position. The scene commander hands you a phone. You're going to call him. You're going to try to convince him that life is worth living. You pick up the phone. Your hands are steady. Your voice is calm. You've prepared for this 1,000 times in simulation. But nothing prepares you for the weight of that moment, knowing that what you say in the next hour will determine whether this person lives or dies. His name is David. He's 26. He's been unemployed for 8 months. His girlfriend left him. He has a .45 caliber pistol and he's telling you that he's done. You spend 63 minutes on the phone with him. You listen. You validate. You build connection. You find threads, his mother, a hobby he used to have, a moment of hope you can magnify. And at minute 63, he puts the gun down. He walks out of the apartment with his hands up. The tactical team takes him into custody. He goes to the hospital for psychiatric evaluation. And you sit in the mobile command unit, completely shaking, feeling something you've never felt before. The knowledge that you just held a human life in your voice. You don't sleep that night. You keep replaying it. You keep thinking about the moment when he almost pulled the trigger. You heard the click of the safety being released. You were one sentence away from hearing a gunshot. One wrong word and David would be dead. But David is alive. And that's because of you. Level 2, the Specialist. 3 years in and you've been primary negotiator on 47 calls. 46 of them ended peacefully. One didn't. That one haunts you every single day. His name was Marcus. He'd killed his ex-girlfriend, and when the police came, he barricaded himself in a storage facility. You negotiated with him for 4 hours. He was talking about responsibility and regret and wanting to die. You were trying to keep him talking because once someone stops talking, that's when they act. But at hour 4, he stopped talking. He just stopped. You kept speaking, kept trying to reconnect, but he wasn't there anymore. And then you heard the gunshot. That was 2 years ago. You've negotiated successfully 46 times since then, but the one failure has eclipsed every success. You think about Marcus constantly. You think about what you could have said differently. You think about whether you missed something, some tone, some micro-moment when you could have changed his trajectory. The rational part of your brain knows that you did everything right. The irrational part, which is increasingly dominant, knows that you failed. Person died on your watch. Your voice wasn't powerful enough. You've changed as a negotiator since Marcus. You're more careful now. You're more perfectionistic. You're obsessed with not missing anything. You listen for every microsignal. You analyze every word someone says, looking for hidden meaning, looking for the moment they might act. You're also becoming aware that you're carrying trauma. You've been trained to use empathy as a tool, but the problem with empathy is that it can't be turned off. You empathize with the suicidal people you talk to. You feel their despair. You feel their pain. You carry it with you after the call ends. You're absorbing everyone's trauma and you have no mechanism for processing it because you can't talk about specific cases. Your wife is concerned. She says you're distant. She's right. You're not really present at home anymore. You're thinking about calls, about Marcus, about the next person who's going to be in crisis and counting on you. She asks what happened at work and you can't tell her. Confidentiality. You just say it was a busy day, and that becomes the extent of your communication. You've also started drinking to manage the anxiety. Nothing heavy. A drink when you get home, maybe another before bed. It helps you stop thinking. It helps you sleep. Your doctor asks about your alcohol intake and you minimize it. You're not addicted. You're just stressed. Level 3, the team lead. At 35, you've been promoted to team lead. You oversee 5 negotiators. You're still the primary on the high-stakes calls, but now you're also responsible for the people working under you. You're responsible for their mental health. You're responsible for their training. You're responsible for their decisions. This is where everything gets darker. You've now experienced something that non-negotiators don't understand. The knowledge that another person's trauma can be your responsibility. One of your negotiators, Jennifer, was primary on a call where the subject killed himself. Jennifer did everything right. She negotiated well. She built rapport. But the subject acted during what was supposed to be a peaceful resolution. And now Jennifer is broken. She's having panic attacks. She's on leave. She's in therapy. And you know that you failed her by not catching something that might have helped. You're also aware that you're not actually training people correctly. You can teach technique, but you can't teach how to live with the weight of this job. You can't teach how to integrate the trauma. You can't teach how to reconcile the fact that sometimes you save people and sometimes you don't, and there's often no logical difference between the two. Sometimes it's just chance. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's that the person decided before you picked up the phone. You've become more paranoid about what you might miss. You've started reading every file obsessively. You've started preparing for every possible scenario. You've started losing faith in the statistics, 95% success rate. What about the 5%? What happens to the negotiator who's responsible for one of those 5% failures? You're also drinking more now. The occasional evening drink has become a nightly routine. You're having trouble stopping at 1. Some nights you're having 3, 4 drinks. You're functional. You're passing fitness for duty tests. But you're also clearly in the early stages of alcohol dependency and you know it. You just don't know how to stop because the alternative is feeling the full weight of what you're carrying. Your marriage is deteriorating. Your wife has started therapy to deal with your emotional unavailability. She's asked you to go to therapy and you've refused. Therapy would mean admitting that you're not okay, and admitting that would mean potentially losing your career. The FBI has regulations about mental health. If you go on record as needing psychological support, your career is effectively over. So you suffer silently. You're also having intrusive thoughts now. You'll be sitting at your desk and you'll suddenly hear the sound of that gunshot. Marcus's suicide. You'll be having dinner with your wife and you'll be hearing Jennifer's voice breaking on a phone call. These moments come out of nowhere. Your brain is playing back trauma that you haven't processed. Level 4, the veteran. You're 42 now, and you've been doing this for 13 years. You've been primary negotiator on over 200 calls. You've saved the vast majority of them. You've also lost some. You've lost 4 to suicide, 3 to homicide-suicide scenarios where the subject killed themselves after killing someone else. You know their names. You know their faces. They're in your head permanently. At this level, you've developed what can only be described as a spiritual crisis. You've been believing in the power of human connection, the power of empathy, the power of words to heal and save. But you've also been confronted repeatedly with the limits of those powers. You've done everything right and people have died anyway. You've done everything wrong and people have lived anyway. You've started to question whether anything you do actually matters. You're also physically breaking down now. You have high blood pressure. You have acid reflux. You have chronic insomnia despite the 4, 5, 6 drinks you're consuming every night. You're on blood pressure medication, antacids, sleeping pills. You're a walking pharmacy. Your doctor has asked you directly about your alcohol intake and you've lied. You're drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, sometimes more, and you've told your doctor you're drinking socially. You've also become someone you don't recognize. You're angry constantly. You're angry at civilians who don't understand what you do. You're angry at tactical teams who don't listen to you. You're angry at subjects who make the wrong choice despite your best efforts. You're angry at yourself for not being perfect. You've yelled at your wife for small things. You've been cruel in ways you regret immediately but can't control. Your team is afraid of you. Your negotiators work hard to avoid being on your shift because you're demanding and critical and almost impossible to satisfy. You see them making mistakes that might have consequences, and you can't tolerate it. You can't tolerate anything less than perfection because perfection is the only thing that saves lives. Except it isn't. Perfection doesn't save lives. Luck does. Circumstance does. Timing does. But you need to believe in perfection because the alternative is accepting that people die regardless of how good you are. You've also lost friends in the field. Another negotiator, not on your team but someone you knew, took his own life 6 months ago. He left a note saying he couldn't carry it anymore. He couldn't carry all the people he couldn't save. That note destroyed you. That note confirmed what you'd been afraid of, that this job breaks people. That eventually, everyone in this profession breaks. You're aware now that you're very close to breaking. Level 5, the broken expert. At 48, you're the most senior negotiator in the FBI field office. You've trained hundreds of negotiators. You've written papers on de-escalation technique. You're consulted on the most difficult cases. You're considered the expert. You're also completely hollow. You can no longer feel anything about the calls you work. Someone is in crisis and threatening suicide and you pick up the phone and you do what you've learned to do, but there's no empathy in it anymore. There's just the technique. You've become a machine that has been perfected at the one thing it does, and that perfection has come at the cost of your entire emotional life. You're no longer married. Your wife left 3 years ago. She said she couldn't watch you slowly die. She said you'd become someone she didn't recognize and that staying with you was destroying her too. You accepted the divorce like you accept everything now, with complete emotional flatness. She was right. You had become someone unrecognizable. You're also drinking every day now. There's no pretense anymore. You drink in the morning to take the edge off. You drink at lunch because you're shaky. You drink in the evening to sleep. You've had your blood pressure emergency warning you. The doctor said if you don't change your behavior, you're looking at a stroke or a heart attack within 5 years. You said you'd try to cut back. You haven't. You've lost contact with everyone who knew you before this job. Your friends have given up trying. They realized you were no longer capable of normal friendship. You don't call them. You don't respond to messages. You exist in isolation, completely alone, carrying the weight of 200 negotiated crises and the 7 people you couldn't save. You've also been in therapy, mandatory therapy after a fitness for duty evaluation, but you've learned how to lie to therapists. You tell them what they want to hear. You say you're managing. You say the coping mechanisms are healthy. You say you're fine. They write it down and you're cleared to return to work, and nothing changes. You're still the best negotiator in the office. You still close 97% of your cases. People still believe in you. What they don't understand is that the person they believe in doesn't exist anymore. That person died years ago. What remains is the technique, the training, the knowledge. But there's nobody home inside. Level 6, the echo. You're 55 years old, and you've been doing this for 26 years. You've been primary negotiator on nearly 400 crisis calls. 298 of them ended peacefully. 102 did not. Wait, you've recalculated that number 1,000 times. You've never gotten the same number twice, which tells you something about how much you've been drinking. You live alone in an apartment that you barely use. You sleep about 3 hours a night when you sleep at all. You're on antabuse now because your liver enzymes are concerning, and antabuse makes you sick if you drink, but you've found ways around it. You've found a type of alcohol that doesn't trigger the reaction, or you've timed your drinking far enough from the antabuse, or you've just decided that sickness is acceptable because the alternative is not drinking, and not drinking means facing the reality of what you've become. You're no longer capable of empathy. That part of you shut down years ago. You can perform empathy. You can say the right things. You can listen in a way that makes people feel heard. But you feel nothing. You're listening to someone describe their suicidal ideation and your brain is registering it as data, not as human suffering. You're also having increasingly severe blackout drinking episodes. You'll go home after work, and the next thing you remember is waking up in the bathtub with no memory of how you got there. You've had multiple DUIs that you've been able to make disappear through the FBI's corruption of the legal system and your connections. You know this is ethically wrong. You can't seem to care. You've also been having suicidal ideation yourself. Not actively, you haven't written a note or acquired a weapon. But you think about it. You think about the irony of it, a suicide prevention expert wanting to die. You think about what would happen if you acted on it. You think about how many people have died talking to you, and how you're still alive, and how that doesn't seem fair or logical. You've been kept in the field despite obvious signs of being unfit because you're too valuable to remove quietly. You close cases. You train people. Your record is impeccable. The institution needs you more than it needs to address the fact that you're disintegrating. You've also become aware that you can never retire. Retirement would mean stepping out of the role that's held your identity together. Without this job, without the validation it provides, you would have nothing. You would have to face the full weight of what you've done and not done. You would have to sit alone with the knowledge that you've sacrificed everything for a job that grinds people up and spits them out. So you'll keep working until your body gives out or you finally act on the ideation. You sit in the command center during your last crisis call, and you're talking to a 24-year-old who's threatening to jump off a building. He's telling you about his pain and his hopelessness, and you're listening with the technique you've perfected over decades. And there's a moment, just a moment, where you see yourself in him. You see the moment where someone's going to carry this weight for years and it's going to hollow them out. And you try to save him not because you believe it will make a difference, but because the technique demands it. He comes down off the building. He gets transported to the hospital. The scene commander puts you on the back and tells you that you did good work. And you nod and accept the praise and drive home, and you pour yourself a drink. And you sit in the dark, alone, carrying everyone you've ever talked down from the edge. And you know that nobody's coming to talk you down. The crisis negotiator operates under a specific psychological burden that few other professions understand. They are responsible for saving lives through nothing but the power of their voice. This creates an enormous weight of responsibility because there's no physical barrier between the negotiator and the consequence of failure. If you make a mistake, someone dies. If you say the wrong thing, someone dies. If you miss something in your listening, someone dies. This responsibility creates a specific kind of trauma response. The belief that perfection is mandatory. Because 95% of the time, it is possible to talk someone down. So every time it fails, the negotiator is left wondering what they could have done differently. This wondering becomes obsessive. You replay conversations 1,000 times. You analyze micro-moments. You search for the mistake that cost someone their life. The empathy that's required for the job is precisely what makes the job traumatic. You have to genuinely listen to people in their darkest moments. You have to feel their despair enough to build authentic connection. But you can't fully dissociate from that despair once the call ends. You carry it. You absorb it. You integrate it into your psychological structure. Over a career of hundreds of conversations, you've absorbed hundreds of people's trauma. The isolation compounds this trauma severely. You can't talk about specific cases. Confidentiality laws prevent you from processing your trauma with friends, family, or even many therapists. The only people you can talk to are other negotiators, and they're all carrying the same burden, so the conversation just becomes a mutual confirmation of how much pain everyone is carrying. So mostly, you don't talk. You just carry it silently. The gap between public perception and internal reality is particularly destructive. Society sees negotiators as heroes. You've saved hundreds of lives. People revere you, but internally, you're obsessed with the people you couldn't save. You're obsessed with the 5% failure rate. You're obsessed with the gaps between what you did and what would have made the difference. This creates a constant dissonance. You're externally honored for your success while internally tortured by your failures. The substance abuse that typically develops is specifically adaptive to the job. Alcohol is a depressant that reduces anxiety and shuts down the obsessive thinking that characterizes trauma. Negotiators drink to stop reliving conversations. They drink to stop analyzing moments. They drink to stop feeling the weight of other people's pain that they've absorbed. The addiction is logical even if it's self-destructive. By level 5 and 6, something darker has happened. The negotiator has lost access to the capacity for empathy that initially drove them to the field. They can perform empathy. They can do the technique perfectly, but the feeling is gone. They've become an automaton that's been perfected at the one thing it does, and that perfection has come at the cost of every other aspect of their psychology. The tragedy of the crisis negotiator is that they chose this field because they believed in the power of human connection to heal. And what the field teaches them over and over is that human connection is not always enough. That sometimes people die anyway. That sometimes your best effort isn't sufficient. That you can be perfect and still fail. And eventually, the accumulation of that knowledge breaks something essential inside you.